Today we're working on workplace friendships. Welcome to Working On It, the podcast that helps you navigate the complexities of today's work environment. I'm Lauren Spearman, brand consultant and advocate for care and transparency in the workplace.
And I'm Molly Johnson-Jones, CEO and co-founder of Flexa. Lauren and I are here to provide you with practical advice, insightful discussion and expert guidance on how to thrive in your career.
Today we're diving into the delicate balance of workplace friendships. From setting boundaries to managing fallouts, we'll explore how to navigate these complex relationships.
We'll look at the data behind why workplace friendships matter, when they can become problematic, and how to maintain professionalism without sacrificing genuine connection.
Before we dive in, Molly, how's your week been? What's been your highlight?
It's been good. It's not a highlight, but something interesting that I learned. It takes a sloth 30 days to digest a leaf.
How did that come up into conversation?
I was reading about animal facts. What about you? Was anything more interesting than sloth digestion happened?
I had a Botox top up, so if I look permanently surprised
Did you?
while that kicks in during this episode, that'll be why.
I've been thinking about Botox, but I have never done it.
I'm all for it. Since I've turned 40, I'm like, fuck it, just stick whatever in my face.
Is that when you had it for the first time?
No, I had it. Actually, talking of workplace friendships, I once had a team photo, and I text the girls the next day and be like, if I ever want to get Botox again, will you show me this photo? The Spock brows.
Oh, have you
were
like
insane?
Completely surprised.
So that is teamwork, supporting each other out when your Botox looks shite.
Talking friendships. I'm sure you've had friends at work. Tell me.
I would have hoped over the last 20 years I've made friends at work.
Tell me about your most memorable workplace friendship.
I have been very fortunate to have made lots of incredible friends and kept lots of incredible friendships. One memorable group of friends was in a job a few years ago. There were 5 of us in the team, and you know, when you look back on jobs and you're like, in the good old days, and everyone reminisces, we knew at that time that we had it really good. We had a really good friendship. We loved coming to work together. We all had different strengths. So we collectively worked really well as a team. We had really good chemistry. We spent time together outside of work by choice. And we all kind of developed our own individual friendships within the group and then as a group collectively. So that's one of my most standout friendships. But I think when I look back on my entire career, the highlights have been the things that I've done with friends that I've made at work.
Really?
Yeah. I don't think there's anything I've done that I've done solo. And I think, my best memories are the friends that I've made.
That's really nice.
What about you?
Well, that's somebody who was famously unfriendly. I actually have had friends at work. If I can do it, anyone can. I can give you tips.
You can't tell because of Botox, but I am actually very surprised.
No, I think if I look back at my career, like definitely when I was younger, and I do think this is an interesting distinction of like running a business versus being an employee and how friendships form. So when I look back to when I was an employee, friendships mattered enormously, particularly like, when you do a grad scheme, you're some of the first people in, like it's the first time you've ever been in an office, you're all in it together. Like naturally, there's sort of almost like a bit of a second freshers week vibe in many ways. And I've still got friends from my first job when I started in a grad scheme. And then going through, I think what's really interesting about workplace friendships is obviously it makes the brilliant moments better and the bad moments more bearable.
Yep.
But I do think there are times where I look back and I'm like, do you start to be paired off with that person by other people's perceptions? If it's just not like a group of friends, but just like one other one. And I can think of one example where I was friends with somebody who was chronically underperforming. Lovely girl, really, really nice, but just terrible at her job.
Oh, so do you think you were then perceived as that as well?
Yeah. And it was then not terrible at my job, but you start to be paired a bit more with somebody. And I think that's where people need to be a little bit cautious. It's like naturally people's perception of you changes depending on who you're friends with.
Yes, but that says more about someone else than it does about you, right?
In some ways, but I think it's natural.
Would you change who you're friends with because of what other people think?
No, but I do think you can be conscious of how it looks.
Yes. Yeah, of course.
No, I didn't just ditch them.
Not good for my reputation.
Terrible for my reputation.
You're
not friends anymore.
No,
but I think you can be conscious of how it seems and appears.
I think for me, friendship it's so vital to great work. I don't think there's ever been a project where I haven't had some form of friendship. And it might not necessarily be a friendship where you spend time outside of work, right? Because I think both of us probably worked with people that we love spend time at work, but that maybe hasn't translated outside of work.
But I wouldn't call that a friendship.
What would you call that?
I say you have a social bond with somebody, like you get on well with someone. I don't think that's a friendship.
Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, do you not think? Oh, well. Oh, maybe I don't have anything. No. I think...
The surprise even came through your face then. Yeah. I don't know, and maybe it just depends on what your definition of friendship is, right? And I also, and this makes me sound really mean, but like I would have in my life a delineation of good acquaintances and friends.
Yeah.
And even good acquaintances, I would still go to the pub with for a drink, but I get on well with them. But friendship for me is quite big.
As in, once it is a friendship for you at work, once it gets outside of work and you would like see them in the evening or at the weekend, or you would, okay.
And they become part of your life that's not at work.
Oh, that's interesting. But your behaviour is still the same at work, right? Or you don't treat them differently?
No, you wouldn't treat them differently, but actually, no, would I?
Until 5 p.m.
Now I'm a different person. I think with friends, they know much more about your personal life. And I've definitely had people at work that I've got on very, very well with, but they wouldn't know very much about me personally.
But I think that's interesting because if you look at the dynamic of you and I,
yeah,
we knew each other online.
Yeah.
But then
sounds weird. Yeah.
We knew each other online, and then we came to know each other in person through this podcast, right? And even if you look at over the last, 12 weeks, however long we've been doing this now, how our friendship has evolved.
Yeah.
And I was saying to you, we were having a conversation the other day about how, because I've got to know you, I know not to hug you when we say hello now.
Exactly. It's just a little wave. Hi. Like when you saw me outside earlier, you're like, hi.
I think that's friendship because I understand you. There's no hugs.
But I think to that example, professional relationships and moving into more familiar relationships, I think that's very, very common at work. And to your point, I think that's really, really necessary for people to be able to work well together.
Yeah, because you're often spending more time with your colleagues than you are your family. You know, if you're in the office or in work environment 40 hours a week, that is a long time to spend with someone. And I think by developing friendships, you develop trust, there's camaraderie.
Yeah.
There is, you kind of touched on it before, but there's almost that kind of trauma bonding even with the terrible jobs. I think if you can have a terrible job, but if you really get on with the people, it will make it bearable.
Yeah, completely.
Whereas if you have a great job and the people are just really not your friend and it's tough, it's never going to be the dream gig.
See, I wouldn't necessarily say, I know there's just a different personality thing, I wouldn't necessarily say the latter would be a problem for me. If I love my job, I was doing really, really interesting work, I don't need friends at work. It makes you sound like a psychopath. But obviously I think it's a wonderful plus to have that, and obviously it'd be great if you did have all of it, but I wouldn't be unhappy in a situation where I was doing a really interesting job, I was doing well, but I didn't have friends at work.
That's interesting because there's been a study by Gallup UK who said that having a best friend at work increases engagement by 27%. So I wonder if that has changed for you since you've become a business owner versus an employee.
That almost certainly has. Like, I do think it's very different owning a business. Like, you have to naturally have boundaries. And because I think true friendship at work makes it much harder to, I think, manage people unless you have a constant line of like really open communication. It's possible. So one of my best friends works for us. She was a friend before and then is working for us. And one of my very good friends was a freelancer for us in the beginning and she works for us now. So she's a very good friend that I have made through Flexa. But you have to be very aware of that communication, very aware of the power balances, very aware of conversations and like how you handle giving feedback and how you handle that. It's a tricky balance to strike. The importance of friendships at work for me, I don't think has necessarily changed massively. I do just think that I maybe rely less on making new friends rather than the friends that I already have.
Yeah.
Also, I do think that we've kind of touched on the maybe potentially problematic side of it. And I think both of us have obviously had quite positive experiences. But the ONS found that 42% of workplace conflicts stem from friendships that have gone wrong.
Oh, that's
42%.
It's interesting you say that, because I don't really have many regrets, but there is one friendship I had in the workplace that went a bit of awry because we were pitted a kind of against each other for a
really
promotion.
tricky.
And it's the only real regret that when I look back, I'm like, now, like, this many years ago, but now I kind of think, with the hindsight and experience I have now, I'd love to go and like almost address that again. I hate the fact that we lost our friendship because we were
put in that situation.
we were in totally separate teams, but pitted against each other for something. And I don't like that I lost the friendship because of that.
You fully lost, like it.
Yeah, we don't speak anymore.
That's a shame. Yeah.
Whereas we had been, really good friends at work. We'd gone on holiday together, and had some really nice memories. And then, work turned it quite sour. So I have had experience like that once. And I've also had experience where it was actually a housemate and we worked together and lived together.
Ooh,
and
tricky.
We both went for a promotion. I got it and she didn't. And the friendship, I found that really then hard to navigate.
Yeah.
Managing someone that was my friend, but also we had both wanted that job.
Yeah, that's a very difficult power dynamic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do think the work friendships are unusual, like true friendships. I mean, like,
not your friendships.
When you go and they know things about you outside of work, you would spend time with them outside of work. That's what I would call a genuine friendship. I think friendships that come from work are unusual in the sense of, like, usually a friendship, there's no external, like, determining factor of what will and won't happen. For example, when you're actually friends and you've made friends, you've met at a party, there's nobody going, now you're going to go up for promotion and fight against each other.
Yeah.
Whereas at work, you've got an employer that can totally change those dynamics. And so again, I think it's interesting because unless you are aware and able to deal with the tension that can come with that, which majority of people aren't, like, naturally there'll be jealousy, there'll be resentment, there'll be all sorts of things that happen in normal friendships as well as work ones. But I think it's the consistent awareness of, like, how it can affect your job and how your job can affect your friendships.
If you're the person that is managing that team, how do you manage that potential conflict that may arise from it, or the tension? Because I think even if they are two people that are not necessarily close mates that are both going for a promotion and they're in the same team, you're going to have a little bit of tension anyway.
Exactly.
But if there is friendship involved, there's perhaps a little bit more emotion as well.
There was some psychology research from the University of Manchester that showed that workplace friendships create dual role tensions, exactly as you talked about. One is being both a friend but also as a colleague. And I guess that can manifest in loads of different ways. So, like, people struggle giving honest feedback to anyone, let alone trying to give honest feedback to your friend. And apparently 68% of people struggle with that. Exactly the same example around promotion. So 73% feel very conflicted around those promotion opportunities. Like, do I go up against my friend? How do I handle it if we're both pitted for the same role? And then this one doesn't surprise me, is that apparently 81% report difficulty maintaining confidentiality. Because I guess if you're in, like, different teams or different areas, like, you're going to talk about that. And
that's a sign of trust in your friendship, whether you do share that stuff that you're probably not meant to.
Yeah, and then if you do share something you're not meant to, and then they then dob you in, obviously that's a big risk. And apparently over half of people experience anxiety about mixing their personal and professional lives, which I find fascinating.
That's high.
Really high.
I guess, again, you just touched on it because they feel like that could be used against them.
Yeah, I think I remember talking to someone that worked for us, and she was talking about the fact that, she would consistently worry about whether she'd overshared. It's really interesting.
Ooh,
And
I wish
nothing
I had that problem.
Not like, I used the butt plug last Saturday. Like,
of all the examples you could have picked. Straight for the butt plug.
Yeah, butt plug on Saturday. But the level of oversharing was nothing like that. It was...
I should have started the podcast asking what you got up to on Saturday.
That should have been my news of the week.
But I also think, I know there are a lot of, on the other end of the spectrum, there are a lot of people who absolutely do not mix business and pleasure.
Yeah.
And because of that exact reason. And, absolute respect to someone, have your really clear boundaries if you don't want to share that. But I think that can sometimes make it quite difficult to connect with someone if you know absolutely nothing about them.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think some of it comes back to employee, like company culture. So there are definitely companies that I have worked in where sharing personal information, like getting to know somebody, was unusual. Like you wouldn't know how many children one of your colleagues had, or you wouldn't know where they lived. And yet in other companies, they do much more like live and breathe the whole idea of like, I don't like the phrase, but you can feel it when it's there. It's like bring your whole self to work, of like people sharing when they're upset or when they're feeling really hormonal because they're on their period, or when they're excited about something or what they're doing on the weekend. And you can feel the difference between those two kinds of company cultures. So I think there are companies that facilitate workplace friendships and others that almost try to avoid them.
Yeah, that whole I don't want to go into it too much, but the whole bring your whole self to work thing, I think, is bollocks, because I don't really think anyone really truly believes that you can do that. I think they're still,
I think it depends on the company.
I feel like we've spoken about it in the last episode. There are elements where, when I look back at my mistakes from work, it's where I have brought my whole self to work. And actually, there probably does need to be a little bit more boundaries in place.
The reason I don't think it's bollocks, I don't like the phrase because I think it is problematic in terms of like, you can't just turn up hungover and be like, I'm feeling like shit and I don't want to do any work today. That doesn't happen at work. But I do think that there are companies where you feel that you can genuinely be yourself and you're not changing your personality. And everybody will have a work version of their own personality. But the whole bring your whole self to work idea, I think, is around that. Of like, you don't feel self-conscious or like you want to change elements of your personality. You can be your true work self.
Yes. Yep. Yeah, that's fair enough. There was a stat that came up in the research that I thought was really interesting about the impact of friendships on your career. Because the London School of Economics found that close work friendships can actually hinder work progression by 23%, because I think because the notion is that you feel comfortable at work, so therefore you don't necessarily want to move on.
Yeah, I'd say there's loads of reasons that it would affect career progression. The first one is like that the dual role tension of like, if you know that your friend is going for a promotion, you might not go for it even if you are genuinely qualified. So you might not push yourself or negotiate yourself into the same situations if your friend is doing that. The comfort, exactly. You're like, I'm very happy. Like, I'm not seeking something more. I've got my relationships around me and I don't need to necessarily work as hard. I think there's also just like, and I look back on when I had good friends at work, you spend a lot of time chatting. Like, it's unavoidable.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes that can maybe spill over into becoming a distraction as well.
Yes. I'm trying to think if I have ever experienced what I feel is people staying in the team unnecessarily because of the friendship. I definitely think it's made people consider it a little bit more. Like, so I mentioned at the start of the episode, the team that I'm most proud of being. And they are the team that I reference pretty much every episode. I've probably shared a story from my experience of working in that team. And actually, we all left within 6 months of each other, because I think once one goes, the rest go.
Yeah, it's really common.
It's a bit like when you're choosing to where you're going to move to, where are your friends? But then once other friends start moving around, you're like, well, I don't need to stay here.
People start to go.
It changes that a little bit.
I do think that definitely happens. I think there's also a level of, if you have a lot of very good relationships at work, there's a level of fear of like, what will my life be like without these people? And that's like, if it hasn't moved into being like a proper true outside of work friend, and it's more like, I really enjoy the company of these people. And we've had that become problematic at Flexa a couple of times. Because I would say that we have a culture where people do genuinely get on very well. There's a couple of what I would call like friendships, if we're delineating between the two, a couple of genuine friendships where people would see each other outside of work and spend time together. But there are a lot of those more like strong bonds of people getting on very well. And what I found is that, and you know, it's a topic that we've kind of covered a little bit before, is it tends to give people this sense of fear of like, maybe it is the right time for me to leave, but I'm scared. Because I've spent so much time with these people. I get on very well with them. Like, how will I feel without them?
I'm getting real deja vu here. Have we spoke about this in another episode where people stay in relationships?
Yeah.
Because they'd rather be in a miserable relationship than they would be like the fear of being on their own.
Yeah.
And I wonder that's almost
Similar
a work
thing.
equivalent.
Yeah. And I think it really, really matters if you've been somewhere for a few years, and like we have had to, there have been times where it's the right thing to part ways, both from that person's professional development, but also from a performance perspective. And one thing that I found very interesting and I've never had to do before was to almost coach them through the anxiety of leaving and being like, no one's going to think badly. The people you like are not going to think badly of you. You can still maintain these relationships. You'll still stay in touch. Like, you can still hold on to these friendships. And I'd never seen that as a reason for not wanting to leave before.
No, and your friendships will evolve. I need to tell you a story from my favourite team, where the first person, so there were 5 of us in the team, and the first person to leave, we used to travel to Glasgow quite a bit for work, as a not always together as a team, but collectively for all sorts of different reasons. And in Glasgow, there was, it's ridiculous, there was this amazing cafe with the best chicken sandwich I've ever had in my life.
Okay.
And 4 of us in the team had all at some point been up to Glasgow and had the chicken sandwich.
What kind of chicken sandwich was it?
Oh my God, Molly, it was like
fried chicken, roast chicken,
slightly buttery fried toasted sourdough with avocado, caramelized onion.
Yeah.
There was like a gin honey mayo, buttermilk. It was fucking sensational.
Was that chicken sandwich actually your best
friend? When this episode goes live, I'll put a picture on LinkedIn. But when the first person to leave from the team, she was the only one that hadn't had the chicken sandwich.
Right.
So as part of her leaving experience, she handed in notice she had a month before. We were like, right, before you leave in a month, we have to engineer a team trip to Glasgow to have the chicken sandwich. And we did. We all found reasons that we could justify why we were going up to Glasgow. And we flew up to Glasgow. We had the chicken sandwich. We both ordered 2 so that we can take one home with us. And then that was part of her leaving present.
I think that's quite a nice little tradition. And I think, that's an example of where I think a work friendship, goes beyond just being a work friendship, right?
Yes, yeah. And actually one of the... It sounds quite ridiculous to say, but when she had to leave the work WhatsApp group, we created a separate one that was like non-work chat, but that had been a WhatsApp group that we'd all been in for 3 years. And then actually it was like, well, this is work, this is the work chat. So she left and we started another one that was non-worky. But even that, it's still, whenever I'm feeling a bit sad, I go into that WhatsApp group and I look through the media section and it's just so many good memories. Yeah.
And I think, as you said, we spend so much time at work that naturally losing a WhatsApp group like that is going to have a massive impact on your life, and how you feel and what you do day to day, like what you spend your time on.
And actually there is some positives to having, well, there's a hell of a lot of positives. I feel like I'm trying to sell you the idea of friends at work.
You don't...
Let me hit some
need
stats,
to sell
Molly.
me the idea
Let me try
of
and convince you. But actually, from a networking opportunity, those friendships I think are really helpful, because as people move around, they meet new people, they can introduce you to new people, which actually I think can be really beneficial for your career.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that can come out of it, and not to be like, oh, I'm right, and all McKinsey agree with me, but the McKinsey UK Workplace Report says that the most successful professionals maintain what they call the friendly professional relationships with those bonds rather than the deep personal friendships. So I guess it's like a balance. And I also think it does depend on personality type, massively so. There are plenty of people that I've seen that have genuinely brilliant friends at work and they have still done incredibly well in their careers and it's never held them back. But I do think it's being conscious of making sure that having those deep personal friendships doesn't move what we were just talking about of like your work self and your home self becoming too intertwined.
I don't have boundaries in that.
Is that why you're freelance?
Actually, do you know, interestingly, one of my biggest fears about going self-employed was
those bonds.
Would I not make friends at work? And firstly, actually, someone that I've made friends with since going freelance, we now do some work together. And then I worked with a client for 10 months recently, and I made a friend from that. And it's a really nice friendship. And actually, we had a phone call yesterday rather than WhatsApp, because as you will have experienced, I'm awful on WhatsApp. But we just had a phone call and I was like, this is such a lovely friendship that has come from actually working together. Of that 10 months, we only worked together for maybe 4 or 5. But that's a really nice friendship that's developed from that. And my work friendships have definitely changed.
Yeah.
But
in what way?
Because I'm not often working with clients for long enough to build that really long rapport. But I have, I think, made other friends that are self-employed.
Yeah. In different situations.
Yeah, and seeing them not just in a work setting as well, like seeing them socially or organising things or hanging out the weekends.
Should we go to a little real life story?
Oh, yes, please. First, let's have a quick ad break. Molly, you know what drives me crazy about marketing agencies? They want to take everything off your plate completely.
Oh my God. And then you're stuck paying huge monthly retainers plus markups on your ad spend, getting reports full of stats that really don't mean anything for your business.
That's why I'm excited about House of Performance. Instead of taking over your performance marketing, they come in and actually coach your in-house team.
And what I love is that they bring all of this agency expertise, but they use it to make your existing team stronger. So you get insights from different industries, real practical support, and your team actually grows their skills instead of just outsourcing everything.
Plus, when you invest in your team like this, they're way more likely to stick around because they feel like they're developing.
If you want to get more out of your marketing without the huge agency fees, then head to houseofperformance.co.uk and mention working on it for a free strategy session with their team.
We're back with a real life story. Here's one from one of the listeners. I have become really close friends with my team at work. We go out together, know about each other's personal lives a lot, but I've just been promoted to manage them and now everything feels weird. How do I maintain these friendships whilst being an effective manager?
Such a good question. And I think it's something that, well, I've definitely experienced it. You've experienced it. And it's not easy. And I think it really depends on a lot of factors. Like, what's your friendship like?
Yeah.
Are you very honest and open with each other? Do you give each other feedback already? Because if you do, then that's obviously a slightly stronger place to start because you've already got that rapport and back and forth. But if you don't, then it's opening up that line of communication and trying to delineate a little bit between your friendship and your work relationship.
Yeah, and I think that they touched on it here where they do seem super close going out together. They know each other about each other's personal lives. And I think there is probably something would be quite productive to have that open relationship of like, that this is the work relationship is going to change and I'd like us to navigate that together. I don't want this to be the elephant in the room. There's power in having ownership of that conversation rather than passively letting it pass you by.
Yeah, and tackling it head on as well, because if you are managing your friend and you're both good at your jobs, then there's an opportunity there, right? You can vouch for each other, advocate for each other, get people into other opportunities that you otherwise might not be able to. You can see it as an opportunity as well as something that is obviously like not ideal and a bit thorny.
Yes, yeah. And actually what this person's experience is pretty common because the Chartered Management Institute found that 67% of new managers struggle with this exact transition.
Yeah.
So it is fairly common, and the more you can own it, the better it'll be. I've had it slightly flipped the other way where I've had a manager that I've become friends with. I've actually had that several times. And the best managers where I've become friends with them, it's such a skill to have such a lovely rapport and friendship, but also know where the boundaries are. And I reference her all the time because she was just such an incredible boss. But I had one particular boss who we knew never to go too far or never to take the piss too much or whatever that was. We just naturally knew, and I can't explain what she did to make us feel like that. But it was a really wonderful, like we felt supportive enough that she was our boss and had our back, but also she was our friend.
That's really interesting. I think a lot of it comes down to mutual respect of the other person and what their role is in that. Like, the person that is being managed by their friend needs to be aware of the fact, like, their friend earned that position, assuming it was all fair and their friend earned that position, they're good at their jobs, and that opportunity might come for them in the future. But I think also that the person that is managing needs to be conscious of establishing respect in that scenario. Like, I hear a lot from people that I speak to around like effective management of distributed teams in particular, because you're not always face to face. And lots of people are like, oh, my team just don't respect me. And they see that as that's the problem of their team. Whereas actually, if you haven't earned somebody's respect, although obviously there's complicated dynamics, like that is a you problem, and that is something that you do need to work on and be aware, like, why haven't you earned that person's respect? Is it because they don't want to respect you, in which case very difficult to navigate? Or is it because you haven't yet set those foundations to be respected?
Or have you shown respect to them?
That too, yeah.
It works both ways. I love a real life story, so appreciate that person sending in. And Molly, I have another story for you from lockdown.
Yeah.
So obviously we all went to remote working. I'm a very sociable person. So I formed a little I slowly formed this little group that just kept getting bigger because everyone was welcome, of like Friday 4 o'clock beer. So at the end of every week, it was a really nice chance for us to grab a beer on a Zoom and just chat. And yes, there would obviously be an element of work chat, but it would navigate to what you did at the weekend, or going for a big walk. That's all there was to do. But it was a really nice way to bond. And it meant that, like, when we got back in the office, people that had joined the business remotely had formed those bonds with people that just felt a bit more sociable. So yeah, I have really fond memories of that time of, lockdown was pretty tough for a lot of us, but that was a really fun time of the week to look forward to.
No, I think the lockdown and that kind of time for making friendships is really interesting. And actually just brings me back to a story that, do you remember when you were at school and you start a new school and you had to actively go and make friends, and you'd like pick a person, you'd be like, I like your vibe. You'd be like, should we go and, I don't know, learn some animal facts about how long it takes sloths to digest some leaves? And then and then you'd be friends, right? But it was so obvious. And watching children make friends, like, it's really interesting. Like, there's this really obvious like desire to make a connection. And I hadn't really experienced that after uni. It always happens at uni and Freshers Week, where people are eyeing each other up. And I remember there's a guy that is still a good friend of mine, and he'll probably know who he is. And I don't know if he'd see it like this. He'd just moved to London and didn't have that many. I think that's true. Didn't have that many friends and just started the company. I remember I used to bring Gruff, my dog, into the office every day. And Gruff is a real talking point because he's just terrified of everybody and loves biscuits. And so we'd be in the kitchen, people were like, oh, feed him a biscuit because it's the only way to get him to like you. And I just remember that real same feeling of this guy coming up to me, and I could just tell he'd picked me to be his friend.
I like that.
Yeah. He'd just come up and he was like, made such an effort every time I was in the kitchen. He was like, I could come and talk to you. And it was like such a like considered, like, I've picked you to be my friend. Yeah. It was actually very... I just quite wholesome, actually, to have that at work, to be like, okay, no, I'm making a conscious decision to make friends at work.
Yeah, I think definitely in the last 5 years or so, I've definitely seen that in some of my work friendships. It's been a bit more intentional. Yeah. Actually, my last corporate job, several friends I've kept in touch with since, but there's two women in particular. And one of them, the first time we met, we'd met on Zoom or something. And the first time we met in person, it was like after work drinks in the pub. And that night we were like, should we book a trip away together? And we'd known each other a month and we just booked a trip away. And, we're really close friends now. And again, another friend within my first week, I think she probably wanted to form a bit of a bond with me to almost protect me from what was about to happen. It's quite a chaotic place to work. And she was really intentional with making time for me and carving out, I guess, a safe space to talk about, what I was finding in the new job and all sorts of stuff. And yeah, we've maintained our friendship, and, we see each other once every couple of months for dinner, and it's really lovely. And I think those intentional friendships, I think definitely as you age as well, in your 20s, I think, especially, I know it's changing a lot now with, flexible hybrid working, but when you're in your 20s and you're in the office every day and, you're out every week, it's always, Thirsty Thursday and all that jazz.
There's way more opportunities.
It's kind of, whereas now I've hit my 40s, I'm not having those experiences in the same way. So I think that intentional friendship is, it's really quite wonderful.
I think it is too, but I think a lot of people have an anxiety and they almost worry about doing that. Like, oh, is this a bit desperate? Or, oh, how will I come across? Whereas actually, we did it when we were kids and it was completely normal. And I don't think it should be a concern, particularly as, we've obviously covered office romances before. Loads of people meet their partners at work and that's seen as completely normal. And so given how much time we spend at work, why not also have that as a way to make friends if that's what you want to do? But I think also, again, it comes back to that balance of like, depends on personality, depends on the culture, it depends on the situation you're in, and it depends on also what you're looking for from work. And I think one thing that I don't want this podcast to make people feel is like, if you don't have friends at work, that's a bad thing either. Like, I don't think... No,
of course. If that's not your vibe, then no. And maybe that's where... That brings us nicely onto setting boundaries at work. Because if you are someone that actually that's not really something you're interested in, which is totally A-OK, how do you maintain those boundaries so that you don't feel forced to share things you don't want to, or to do things that you're not comfortable with.
I found this one, when we were obviously doing some research, quite difficult to formulate like properly useful advice on it, because I do think it is so subjective and so personal. But when I was Googling it, I found that there is a little professional friendship framework that the Institute of Leadership and Management created.
Okay, what have they suggested?
There's kind of 4 main points, and I don't necessarily agree with all of them. Again, I do think it's quite personal to the individual and how comfortable they feel at work sharing personal things. The first one is to keep personal discussions for outside of work time. So that could be like you go for lunch and you have a chat, or after work or whatever, but it's like there's a delineation between work time and personal time.
But if someone is trying to have personal chat in work time, the suggestion there would be to keep a short and concise answer, because ultimately people will start picking up on that. If you ask someone, what was their weekend like, and they don't give you much of an answer, you kind of know. So I actually had a boss like this who... she was a great boss, but like not the warmest of people. And I started to take it upon myself, because she would never ask me anything. I would just give her information about what I'd done at the weekend.
Without being off?
At the start of every one-to-one, I was like, are we not going to have any chit-chat? Because it made me feel so uncomfortable. And I was like, I know it's because she doesn't want to share anything about her. So I'm going to offer up something about me.
Yeah. Was she comfortable with that?
Not really. I don't think she cared, but it just made me feel a little bit easier about the fact that she didn't want to.
Yeah, so I think that's exactly it, right? Everyone's going to have different preferences about how they're managed, what level of personal information they share. And I think it's about being conscious of compromise around that. Like, she also should have been aware that it was obviously making you uncomfortable to have no personal rapport, but then also could she have given you 20% and you dialed it back? I think it's about
there's
the
a little
individual.
give and take, I guess.
And their second point is to maintain consistent standards across the team. I find this, as someone that has a big team of people, I would find that quite difficult to truly implement. And the reason I say that is because different people like being managed in different ways. They like having different relationships, different communication styles. I think it's very difficult to blueprint. I think the one thing that is very important is, even if you do have genuine friends at work, that doesn't then translate into what could be perceived as favoritism. Just because you have a personal bond with somebody does not mean you rate them above other people. And I think that's something that is incredibly important, and definitely I feel is like, even if I get on better with somebody, that really doesn't affect how I see performance. Like, some of the people that I've previously managed in other roles, I've actually probably found that some of the people that I would see as the best performers, I haven't necessarily had that kind of personal relationship with.
There's an interesting point of that as well, as when it comes to hiring. So yes. I have managed teams where I have hired people that I've worked with before.
Yeah.
But as part of that hiring process, they have gone through a different process, because I didn't want to be seen as like offering them favoritism. Yeah. So anyone that I have eventually hired, they have been interviewed by other people before it got to me.
Yeah, which I think is a very good thing to do. And that's exactly what our head of retention did. She had previously worked with somebody for 2 companies, and they're friends as well. And she was like, I want to take an interview process where we interview other people. We make sure that she's genuinely the best person in the running. So I think being aware of that, because the last thing you want is for other people's perception to be like, they got this job because they're friends with you. And we've had some pushback with, as I said, one of my best friends works for us. And I do find it interesting. We have had to do some like internal PR at times to make sure that they don't think
it's just because you're mates. Yeah.
But that's mental to me, because I would have to think that someone is exceptional to risk a friendship, because it's not just like, oh, it's easy. She could have got any job she wanted.
Yeah.
But the risk of bringing a friend and managing a friend is huge. So I had to genuinely believe that she was an exceptional candidate. Otherwise, I would never have put my friendship that matters to me enormously at risk.
But it is interesting, because when we come back to that point earlier about your friendships can help your career progression.
Yeah.
It's a tricky line to flow, because it's you also know what they're like to work with.
Yeah.
But you also can't let that make the decision for you.
It should be about the reason that friendships are great in terms of career progression should be about the fact that you discover opportunities that you might not otherwise, not because of nepotism or favoritism.
Yes, of course.
And then the third point, which I think is really important, is not letting things fester. So addressing issues promptly and professionally, I think, is so important. If you feel any tension, if there is any feedback, you have to create those clear, frequent lines of communication. I completely agree with that one. And then the final one is creating clear work and like actual social boundaries, like when something is a social event versus a work event, which I also agree with.
But that's interesting because I think a lot of this episode we have focused on friendships at work with your direct colleagues. But actually, often in the nature of what we do, we're meeting people from outside of our own businesses who we may have working relationships with, whether that's agencies, third parties, whatever that is. And I think that's something we may perhaps haven't touched on yet, is how do you navigate those friendships as well? Because I think I've made friends through people that I've maybe worked at agencies or I've met in some kind of work capacity.
It's kind of in between the two, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because you're more like, there aren't the same potential negative consequences or tensions that could evolve if it's outside of work but still in a professional environment. Like that, you've really only got opportunity there rather than massive risk.
I also think the friendships, not in a taking advantage way, but I think they can buy you leverage. So, if you are, when I've been client side and working with an agency, if we're really struggling with a deadline, a friendship might allow me to have a much more honest conversation about what's happening and why we're not going to hit a deadline and can they give us a bit more time? Or I think there are so many benefits to building that relationship. But I
maybe
you
wouldn't say
question
those
whether
benefits of friendship. I think that's a very good professional relationship. Right, so we've got a quick fire round.
Oh, okay.
Friend or foe?
Okay, I'll go first. Sharing salary information with your work friends.
Wouldn't say that's problematic at all. I think people should talk about salary more. I think the one scenario I have seen that is very bad is where people push their friends for their salary information when they're not comfortable sharing it.
Yes, absolutely. I think if it's a part of an open conversation
where both parties are comfortable.
Yes.
But I've seen people try to use their personal relationships within work to try to get information out of people.
Yeah, that's not cool. That has actually, I have had experience of that where I have had a friend, we were working at the same level but different experience, and we had a really open conversation about our salaries, and I was able to help her negotiate a slightly higher salary.
So that's a good scenario that comes out of it.
But it wasn't, neither of us forced that conversation.
Yeah. Which I think is super important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Going on holiday with colleagues. I have never gone on holiday with a colleague.
Oh, I have. Even recently, a couple of months ago, I went away with, twice this year I've actually been away with ex-colleagues or become friends. One of them was possibly the most gin I've ever consumed in an evening. On a trip to Ibiza once. Yeah, I love a work holiday.
I can see why it would be fun.
Okay, I've got one. Being friends on social media with your boss.
Tricky. I don't know. It depends on how you feel about it, and what your relationship is like with your boss. I can understand why people would be uncomfortable with it.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's fair enough.
Oh, what about this one? A work friendship becoming a work relationship.
Oh, well, we did touch on this in our very first episode about office romances. They can very much be a positive if it blossoms, but I think it's knowing how to navigate it so it doesn't impact the team, or if it goes tits up, you can come out of that the other side without it.
You can listen to our office romances
Yes.
episode to know how to navigate moving from being a friend to a relationship. Brilliant. So should we wrap up with a few interesting statistics?
Yes, I really like this one. 76% of British workers consider workplace friendships important. I am absolutely in that 76%. One of my career highlights is the friendships I've made.
I would agree if we extend it to the very good professional relationships.
Professional.
If it was just...
It's not a friendship, it's a professional relationship.
It's a warm professional relationship. Teams with strong friendships strong, warm professional relationships are 50% more productive, which I'm completely not surprised by.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Being able to have that rapport with somebody does make working together so much easier.
I do. I think it's that rapport, the camaraderie,
Yeah.
shared experiences. I think
Happiness
incredibly
as
so.
well. Like social bonds are so important.
And actually 32% of workplace friendships last beyond the job change. So
That's
I think
quite
when we come back to
high.
that, when we come back to a point earlier in the episode about staying in a job
Yeah.
because of worrying about leaving your friends,
Yeah, shows
the
that
good friends will come along with you.
a third of those workplace friendships last. That's really high.
Yeah.
But on the flip side, 45% of people report having some regret over mixing personal and professional lives.
Yeah, and I think that's come out quite a fair bit in this episode, that a lot of tension can come from almost being so close to someone. So learning how to navigate that, how to have difficult conversations, how to have open conversations can ease that tension for sure.
Exactly. It's all about careful navigation. But that's it for this week's episode on workplace friendships. Remember, it is possible to be friendly without compromising professionalism.
As ever, if you want to share your own stories with us, please do let us know at workingonit.pod or email us hello@workingonit.show.
Next time on the podcast, we will be decoding corporate buzzwords.
Oh, that's going to be a good one. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you next time. Until then, keep working on it.